feeling like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong in my happy place. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong in my happy place.
Hello and welcome to the National University of Singapore Yonglulin School of Medicine's Healthy Longevity webinar. Thanks for joining us tonight. I want to remind you to use the Q&A function to ask questions. This should be an interesting topic of discussion, so I'm sure there'll be a bunch of questions. We have Sebastian Brunemeier who will be joining us tonight, talking to us about the investor landscape and longevity. But before we get to that, we're going to have Patrick Sidjar, who's a research assistant at the Center for Healthy Longevity here in the US, talking about his study, The Influence of Exercise on Biologic Aging in Breast Cancer Survivors.
Good day all. As mentioned, my name is Patrick, and today I'm excited to share with you some interesting findings from the Brexint pilot study. We examine the influence of exercise on biological aging in breast cancer survivors. So broadly, we know that cancer is one of the leading causes of death and disease burden. In Singapore, breast cancer accounts for about 1 in every 3 cancer cases in females. It's also understood that aging and cancer share similar hallmarks such as genomic instability, epigenetic alterations, and chronic inflammation. As such, women who have cancer will also experience a faster biological aging. Furthermore, cancer therapy such as chemotherapy can contribute to biological aging as it perturbs molecular processes that drive cellular stress and damage. As such, cancer patients are at risk of developing age-related diseases much faster. So, how does exercise help in slowing down cancer and aging? Well, research has previously shown that exercise is great as supportive care for cancer patients. Exercise improves functional capacity as measured by cardiorespiratory fitness and muscle strength. This helps with cancer therapy tolerance so they can better handle the adverse effects and higher doses of the therapy. Their well-being and quality of life also improves, and most importantly, cancer recurrence is decreased. A possible explanation for this would be molecules or myokines that are released during exercise with systemic effects all over the body. Although the exact reasons have not been characterized yet, some groups have delved into the myokines to characterize their effects. For example, as seen here, interleukin-6 or IL-6 is an inflammatory messenger molecule in the immune system, but is also produced by the skeletal muscles during exercise to improve energy metabolism. And to examine this in the Singaporean population, we carried out the Breast Cancer Exercise Intervention or the Brexint pilot study, which is a joint endeavor by NUS, National Cancer Centre Singapore, Singapore Cancer Society, and ASTA. Despite a national target of 50 participants, we managed to recruit 15 participants to be stratified into the control or the exercise intervention group, which carried out supervised aerobic and resistance training for 3 sessions a week for 24 weeks. These breast cancer survivors were deemed sedentary prior to joining the study to ensure a fair trial. We also collected the fasting blood samples at baseline, 8, 16, and 24 weeks for laboratory and biomarker testing. From the routine laboratory test results, we were able to extrapolate the biological age of our participants using the pheno-age clock. And here we present our preliminary biological age findings from baseline to week 16. At week 24, we did not have enough available data points to be included in the figure. We present the average age difference between the phenotypic and chronological age across the 3 time points. The baseline age difference, as you can see on the left, is observed to be similar between the 2 groups, which ensures a fair starting point for our analysis. and we are delighted to see a younger biological age for our exercise intervention participants as compared to the control group for both 8 and week 16. The results were not statistically significant, but an average decrease of 2 and 2.92 years respectively, there may be a positive effect on biological age with exercise for our cancer survivors. Nonetheless, the trend observed supports the hypothesis that a combined exercise intervention could help to slow down biological aging in breast cancer survivors, who generally have a faster rate of aging. We hope to conduct a larger study to validate these findings with a longer monitoring period to determine if exercise does indeed mitigate cancer symptom and recurrence. In addition, we carried out only a low to moderate intensity exercise intervention to ensure that our participants are safe. However, a higher intensity or even personalized exercise regimen could further help these cancer survivors. I hope I've convinced you that exercise is indeed medicine, especially when it comes to preventing future illnesses. We encourage you all to start exercising if you have not. Start small, but be consistent. And if you are interested in participating in our future exercise studies, please feel free to email us with your name and age. I would like to acknowledge my study team from NUS, NCCS, SCS, and A-STAR whose joint efforts ensured the smooth process of the Brexint study. Thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. We're honored to welcome Sebastian Brunemeier tonight, a friend of mine for a number of years. He's a partner at Healthspan Capital, a venture fund specializing in longevity, biotech, and regenerative medicine. He's also the co-founder of Cambrian Biopharma, Samsara Therapeutics, and Immunage Bio. Collectively, these organizations have raised over $400 million in the past 4 years. As a trained longevity scientist, Sebastian was a Fulbright Fellow in the Biology of Aging, a Skaggs Oxford Scholar at the Scripps Research Institute, and a SINS Foundation Scholar at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. The title of his talk tonight is Building and Investing in Longevity Biotech, or Long Bio Companies. Thanks for joining us, Sebastian. I hear you're in Thailand despite your background.
Yeah, exactly. The famous Thai Alps behind me. We're here for a conference on longevity that we're organizing, and I'll actually be in Singapore in a couple of weeks, so I'll drop by the lab and say hello to people. So yeah,
Sounds
thanks
good.
again for thanks for hosting me, and yeah, I'll just share my slides here. Hold on a sec. So I'm going to be telling you all about long bio, longevity biotech, as the apotheosis of medicine, the final form of medicine, what we all spent many years in the lab working on, the basic science, translating it into the clinic for patient benefit. So tell you about my own background, Healthspan Capital, an overview of the long bio field, this growing subsector of biotech, diagnosing some of the problems in biopharma's R&D decline, and Geroscience and long bio as the holy grail of medicine. So who am I? My own background, Sebastian Brunemeier, longevity scientist by training, worked at a bunch of different research institutes, did a stint at the Buck Institute where I met Brian some years ago. Then I transitioned into the biotech side. I helped launch Apollo Health Ventures as an early employee. It's the largest aging-focused venture fund in the world today. Founded a company called Samsara Therapeutics, which is working on autophagy enhancement. So the benefits of fasting are largely to do with autophagy, the cellular recycling process. I co-founded a company called Cambrian, which is a large multi-asset company working on longevity, and also I help lead Healthspan Capital and Immunage Bio, and we'll get into those in detail. If you want to get into the longevity biotech field, I would recommend checking out these organizations, particularly the Longevity Biotech Fellowship, which is co-founded by my partner, Nathan Chang, and it is the largest organization in the world for founders, investors, and longevity scientists. We do conferences and meetups and journal clubs and all kinds of things you can get involved in. So check out Longevity Biotech Fellowship. So Healthspan Capital, we are, to our knowledge, the most active investor in longevity today. We've done 32 deals in the last 2 years. We focus pretty much exclusively on therapeutics that can add decades to healthy lifespan. We really like gene and cell therapy modalities in particular and various regenerative medicine approaches. Here you can see some of the team members, lucky to have them around the table, some of our advisory board and their various affiliations across pharma, academia, biotech, et cetera. Some of our portfolio companies, you can check out the complete list on our website, healthspancapital.vc. If you're a long bio founder, get in touch. And if you're an investor, you can also get in touch. So to give you an landscape of the long bio ecosystem, there are a lot of companies referring to themselves as long bio, but we actually have fairly strict criteria related to the extension of lifespan across species. But you can see my partner Nathan at longevitylist.com tracks the rise of these companies in the longevity space, and it is growing exponentially. And in addition, you can also go on longevitylist.com and see investors in the space, job postings, clinical trials. You can also subscribe to his newsletter, Longevity Market Cap Newsletter, which is the largest in the field. So here you can see some of the other investors and company builders. Some of these are not completely dedicated to longevity, but a handful of them are, including us. This is my social proof slide, my appeal to ethos. Some of the smart cookies who are investing in this space you may recognize: Peter Thiel, Bezos, Balaji, they're in Singapore, Vitalik, who's visiting the conference in Thailand, and a whole lot of other prominent names. And so hopefully this is just the beginning and we will have a lot more investors in the space. So here's a snapshot of just some of the companies in the space. There's some publicly listed companies that are kind of longevity adjacent. And then there are privately held companies that are really truly hardcore longevity biotech companies focused on lifespan extension. Two that have been in the news are Calico and Altos. These are the largest in terms of funding. So Calico, about 10 years ago, spun out of Google with about $3 billion financing and a partnership with the big pharma AbbVie. It's led by Arthur Levinson, who is the legendary CEO of Genentech. They have a lot of top talent in the longevity field. They have 3 clinical trials ongoing currently, maybe more now, and it's built on the Bell Labs, AT&T Bell Labs model of innovation. They are critiqued a little bit for being a bit too secretive. People don't really know exactly what they're up to, and that's not really in the spirit of scientific collaboration historically, but we'll forgive them if they can cure aging. And another is Altos Labs, which was also $3 billion financing. It was the largest initial seed financing in history of any company. It has formerly Calico's Hal Barron, GSK, was it GSK? He's at Altos. They have funding from Bezos and Yuri Milner and Arch Ventures and Rockefeller Foundation, et cetera. And they have Shinya Yamanaka, the Nobel laureate of Yamanaka reprogramming fame. So, so those are some companies that have got a lot of attention, and we will see how the mega company, megacorp pharma-like model compares with the smaller, more nimble sort of speedboat model that we tend to invest in. Right, so there's a bit of a problem, which is pharma internal R&D is declining in efficiency. So this is termed E-Room's law. It's a term coined by my friend and colleague Jack Scannell, and he attributes it largely to unrealistic animal models of disease. So we work on these contrived genetically engineered animals or animals poisoned with some toxin, and we call that the human disease. And it turns out they don't really concord with the actual human disease and aging itself. So the cost to get new drugs approved has been rising exponentially, even though all the tools we have at our disposal, genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, et cetera, are getting better. We're getting less efficient at developing drugs, at least through the traditional pharma model. And you can see some more data here. The rate of return is less than the cost of capital. So pharmas are burning investors' money on internal R&D, and that has resulted in acquisitions, primarily of biotechs. There's some good news, though, which is, according to the data of Andrew Lo, professor at MIT, who's an excellent source in this field, in the year 2000, only 13% of drugs derived had their origin in biotech or academic labs of the best-selling drugs. But if you fast forward to the year 2018, about 80% of the best-selling drugs came from biotech and academia. So pharma is sort of pulling away from R&D for better or worse. It causes a problem because there's a bottleneck in the number of people who can fund these companies as well as found these companies, but hopefully we're improving. Some more good news is the rate of clinical trial success seems to be increasing. These numbers are a little out of date. It's not quite as good as it looks here, but they are increasing slightly. And Andrew Lo attributes this to more academic drug discovery, biotechs, new modalities like gene therapy, where we actually know the molecular pathology, the etiology of the disease. et cetera. And he co-founded a company called BridgeBio, which is today worth 6 or 8 billion. They have at least one approved drug. And they basically took this multi-asset approach, this hub and spoke approach to rare diseases. Before developing drugs for rare diseases was cool. Now it is very fashionable in pharma. And at Cambrian, we have endeavored to do something similar, taking a lot of different shots on goal in the aging space. So stepping back, why is it so important that we work on longevity biotech, that we slow the aging process? There is a problem called the silver tsunami, a global demographic aging crisis that affects pretty much the entire developed world. And I wrote an article about a year ago comparing it in severity to, say, climate change or global war, et cetera, and arguing, perhaps provocatively, that the silver tsunami is a greater threat than climate change or war or any other major concern for the simple fact that it is 100% guaranteed to occur. So climate change, we can mitigate its effects. There's controversy over how serious it will be. War is certainly not guaranteed either. But there's nothing we can do. No amount of money or resources or government mandates will create more 25-year-olds as of today. So this is baked into the cake and locked in. So for that reason, we need to slow the aging process. Here's another graphic. So in the year 2010, countries in red are those where over 20% of the population is over 65 retirement age. You fast forward to 2050, it's basically the entire developed world. And no government has a credible plan to deal with this demographic aging crisis. The pension systems, the healthcare systems are not equipped. So we humbly submit that the best way to mitigate this stress would be to extend healthy lifespan and extend the years of productive life so people can work for longer and be less of a draw on the healthcare system. What you may not realize is that even if we cured cancer or heart disease or one of these age-related diseases entirely, on a population level, it would only increase lifespan by about 3 to 5 years. So the only way to extend lifespan across the board and mitigate the silver tsunami crisis is to extend lifespan and slow the aging process. So traditional pharma extends some life in the unhealthy period of life at the end, right? So you might pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a cancer drug that extends your life 6 months or something. This is very costly, the healthcare system. It's perhaps an outdated paradigm. Paradigm we like is adding extra healthy years to life, which is supportive for government budgets. So Big Pharma admits that they're generally asleep at the wheel. They're slow to move. Jürgen Drews, head of R&D at Roche, one of the most sophisticated big pharmas based in Switzerland, said, biotech is taking up what pharma is neglecting, attacking the root causes of disease. I would argue there's nothing more at the root than aging itself. And then David Baltimore, president of Caltech, Nobel laureate, said that regarding the biotech revolution in the 90s, pharma was asleep at the wheel, unable to understand the profound opportunities in molecular biology. And this gave rise to companies like Genentech and Biogen and Hybridtech and many others that revolutionized medicine. And today, the best-selling drugs are mostly biologics, like think about the peptide therapeutics for weight loss. Those were creations of the biotech age that pharma was not advancing at the time. So Geroscience offers a new paradigm. I liken the Geroscience dawn to the dawn of antibiotics in the turn of the 20th century. So if you were to say to doctors in the year 1900, hey, you know those bacterial infectious diseases that are killing so many people? Well, in the near future, people are not going to be dying from those. We're going to bring infection under medical control. To use Aubrey de Grey's term, we aim to bring aging under medical control. It's not realistic to expect that we'll cure it anytime soon, even though I think that's physically possible, and we can get into that. We just want to mitigate its damage. And so I'm here to tell you, and the longevity biotech field is here to say, we can extend lifespan pretty significantly in many different model organisms. And now is the time to translate this into the clinic as fast as we can. And part of the reason we're able to do this translation is because of the works of Kennedy Lab and US researchers and researchers, geroscientists all over the world, the basic science. We understand the molecular drivers of aging relatively well. Just in the last 10, 15 years, we haven't really discovered new hallmarks of aging. So it's kind of like the standard model in particle physics. We kind of think we know most of the particles and the rest are sort of details. So we think it's time to start translating But that isn't to say that these pathways are simple by any means. They're extremely complicated and we need a lot of work on them. But we don't seem to be finding entirely new particles, so to speak. We do have an accumulating backlog of interventions, pharmacological and genetic, that extend lifespan across species. Here are shown mice, and this is even out of date. We probably have over 100 of these that are well known. So our job is to get those in the clinic. Here's the quantum of some of my favorite interventions and some that I think are maybe a little overhyped. So metformin, for example, you only get 5% lifespan extension with metformin, but apparently you can get 5% lifespan extension with glycine supplementation, which is devoid of the side effects of metformin, et cetera. I'll be talking to you in a minute about heterochronic bone marrow transplant, young to old bone marrow transplant, which can confer longer lifespan. But we have a lot of these now. So the point is they're accumulating and we need to raise the capital to get these in the clinic. This is probably the most important slide for those that are actually in the biotech and pharma space to remember why I believe that long bio will have a higher success rate than traditional pharma. So the biggest problem, according to Jack Scannell and many others, is the non-predictive animal models of disease. So think about Alzheimer's disease. We have this Mouseheimer's model. We genetically engineer mice to produce 10x the normal amount of amyloid beta. And then we, in the field, called that Alzheimer's for many decades, could cure it in the mice, couldn't cure it in the humans, decades, hundreds of billions wasted on that hypothesis. And it's actually still continuing to be funded, even though there's been a lot of evidence that the amyloid hypothesis was sort of a false dogma. So instead of doing that, relying on all these contrived animal models, we rely more in the long bio field on wild type normal aging. We haven't engineered the mice. We haven't poisoned them with a toxin. And across many species, yeast, worms, flies, fish, mice, what have you, if you have a drug like, say, rapamycin that extends lifespan across all these species that are many millions of years evolutionarily distant, it's much more likely to work in humans. It's much more likely to work for many different diseases because if it's authentically slowing aging, it should work for many different age-related diseases, both as a treatment and as a preventative. And even if I'm only a little right in its increasing clinical trial success by 10% across the board, that is worth many billions of dollars to pay for itself many times over. So switching gears to talk about bone marrow a bit, I've been in the field for over a decade as a founder, venture investor, scientist, et cetera. So, I've seen it all pretty much. And this is the science that I think is most ready for translation and has the highest potential for lifespan extension. And it is rejuvenating the bone marrow stem cells, the hematopoietic stem cells that give rise to the entire immune system. This is why recently we founded ImmuneAge Bio, which is the first company to systematically search for immune system rejuvenating compounds at the level of HSCs and T cells. So the HSC, it is at the apex of the entire immune system. It lives in your bone marrow. It's the most proliferative cell type in the whole body, gives rise to all these different immune cell types. There have been, small revolutions in oncology and immunology targeting just T cells or just NK cells or B cells. But we think it makes sense to target the source of all of those cells, and then you address all of the downstream cell types. So some research that really turned me on to this some years ago is the young to old bone marrow transplant field, heterochronic transplant. You take young bone marrow transplant into an old mouse. The old mouse lives longer, up to about 28% longer, which is, as far as we're aware, the largest effect size for any single therapeutic intervention. It also slows aging in every way that we check, on the tissue level, cognitive function, physical function, et cetera. Their hair goes from gray to black, and it enhances memory and learning, which I would not have expected a priori, rejuvenating the immune system to enhance cognitive function, but alas, it does. So what do we do specifically at ImmuneAge? We have a two-part platform. The first is stem supply, where we can achieve 1,000-fold expansion of HSCs, maintaining stemness. This was a big challenge in the field. It resulted in 2 Nature papers from our collaborators at Stanford and Oxford. This can be a revolution in the bone marrow transplant field, where 50% of patients don't receive a bone marrow transplant in time. They die on the wait list, and that's in America, saying less about the rest of the world, which is even worse served. And what we use it for is, with this large supply of human and other species HSCs, aged HSCs, we can for the first time do relatively large throughput drug screening for cocktails of molecules that rejuvenate the HSCs, looking at various hallmarks of aging. We can also plug in various omics readouts into pretty standard deep learning to classify old, young, and rejuvenated HSCs as well as T cells. So we're developing several products. The first is an orally available small molecule that boosts function of HSCs, T cells, and many other cell types. The second is rejuvenating HSCs ex vivo in the cocktail. And the third is the HSC expansion platform. So some of the work we've done in the last 2 years or so since we've launched, work published in Nature Aging from our collaborator in Switzerland. We developed, as far as we're aware, the most sophisticated platform for finding immune rejuvenators of HSCs, and then the 2 Nature papers from our collaborator at Oxford. So a bit about the team. Lucky to have this team around the table. Some of these folks are world leaders in immune system aging. They've been at various top institutions, pharmas, biotechs, et cetera. Myself and Joseph are leading in the management team. You know about my own background, Joseph's background. He's a stem cell biologist by training, was at Harvard, is leading commercial strategy at Novo Nordisk's stem cell group. He was chief BD officer at STEM Medical, the second ever company to get mesenchymal stem cells approved in Europe. For his sins, he spent 5 years at McKinsey working with various pharmas, and we worked together closely at Apollo Ventures. We also have our scientific collaborators, Nicola Vanini, Adam Wilkinson, in Lausanne and in Oxford, world leaders in their respective fields. Some of our advisory board members, you may recognize some of these, are leaders in the aging space. I'll mention in particular Thomas Ebeling, who's a former CEO of Novartis, board of Bayer, Lonza, QIAGEN, et cetera, and he's an investor in the company. We're lucky to have folks like that supporting us. Our operational team, rock stars in bone marrow work and various drug discovery modalities and experience in pharma. So if you have a therapy that rejuvenates the immune system, ultimately everybody on Earth will benefit from this. This is the main reason I'm working on this. It's to rejuvenate my own immune system and my friends, family in the world, and to show pharma, that their current model of not very innovative medicine is not so exciting. But in the near term, we need to target smaller, more tractable indications. One is respiratory tract infections and immune senescence. Fourth leading cause of death globally is respiratory tract infections. Another is chemotherapy. So rejuvenating the immune system improves response to tumors, anti-tumor surveillance, et cetera. But there's an even simpler approach, which is before you get chemo, we can bank your bone marrow stem cells, your HSCs. You get the chemo and they dodge the bullet of the damage that would have been done to them by the chemo. So chemo generally are DNA damaging agents, and they tend to kill fast dividing cells. Cancer cells divide fast, but the fastest dividing cell type in your body is the HSC. By far, it's the fastest. And so the dose limiting toxicity on chemotherapy is bone marrow suppression, myelosuppression. So the simple approach of banking your bone marrow before you get the chemo, dodge the bullet, and then reinfusing and restore immune function will be beneficial in the short term acutely, but also long term, preventing the reemergence of tumors as a result of the damage that's been done to the immune system by the chemo. There are many other applications in bone marrow transplant, vaccine response in elderly. Turns out that the immune system governs atherosclerosis and cognitive decline, and the immune system travels throughout the whole body and governs aging systemically. So we think it's a good place to intervene. So wrapping up here, the long-term vision is the immune system reboot, which is a non-invasive or low-invasive procedure where we mobilize your HSCs into your peripheral bloodstream, step one. This is routinely done all over the world every day. 90% of bone marrow donations are done this way. It's just an injection. The HSCs move into your circulation. We pluck them out using an apheresis machine. Then we expand using stem supply. Step three, we rejuvenate using the cocktails. Step four, we bank them for later because no one's getting any younger. You're going to want those young HSCs in the future. And then we reinfuse the rejuvenated HSCs periodically after a certain age, maybe every 5 years or so, like an oil change or a tune-up in your car, just to keep your immune system humming. So the analogy to remember is the ship of Theseus, this ancient Greek myth about the concept of continuity, where you slowly replace some pieces of wood in the ship. When do you declare that you have a new ship? That's what we aim to do, is gently, gradually replace and refresh the immune system. So to conclude, we need to accelerate this biomedical revolution and evolution. Pharma is not really doing it very efficiently. Governments are not doing it very efficiently. So it really falls upon basic scientists and startup founders and investors. Craig Venter, genomics pioneer, said if the 20th century was a century of physics, the 21st will be the century of biology. And Steve Jobs said the biggest innovations will be at the intersection of biology and technology. So I, for one, feel very fortunate to be in this space. I've dedicated my career to this space. I think we should all feel fortunate to be in such a cool space. And yeah, I'm very bullish, very keen to see what Singapore does in the future. Singapore is, one of my favorite countries. I'll be there in a couple of weeks, and anything I can do to help advance longevity research, happy to do. And thanks to Brian and the entire team at NUS for all the work that you do. So with that, happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sebastian. That's great. Lots of things to talk about, and I may even probe you to talk about some things you didn't bring up too with some of the other things you're doing. But let's start on the simple stuff. So maybe we could start with the term longevity adjacent and longevity company, and you could elaborate a little bit more, separate the things, and we can talk a bit about how to do longevity.
Sure. Yeah. So generally, most drug development discovery companies, they are palliating late-stage symptoms of disease. So when you get cancer diagnosis, you probably already have metastatic cancer, and well, hopefully not. But if that is the case, it's been developing for a very long time. If you have cancer, it means there's the seed and soil theory. So it's not just the presence of a pathogen or a single tumor cell. It's that the immune system has weakened, the DNA damage has accumulated, the conditions are ripe for a forest fire. And so most of medicine is kind of just palliating things in a last-ditch effort. It's not preventative. We are coming into that era, hopefully, but the payment system is not really optimized for it. Distinguishing traditional biotech and pharma from long bio, it's quite simple. It's targeting a mechanism that extends lifespan and healthy lifespan, and thereby prevents and or treats multiple age-related diseases. So for example, checkpoint inhibitor drugs. These are incredible drugs for various cancers. They can cure certain uncurable cancers, but you would not want to take those preventatively. And that's true of most pharmaceuticals. Most pharmaceuticals, if taken chronically, are actually bad for you. They're going to shorten your lifespan. But we're interested in those pharmaceuticals, those rare therapies that are actually good for you, even if you take them preventatively, even if you take them when you're well. So for example, rapamycin could be one case that's pretty well studied. Some of the autophagy enhancers at Samsara. There's an AMP kinase activator. It's the lead program of Cambrian, which causes fat loss without muscle loss. AMP kinase, according to my pharma colleagues, has been sort of the holy grail of drug discovery for a long time. It's hard to drug selectively. And so these are therapies that we would take even before getting a specific disease to slow the pace of aging. So those are the criteria we look for, lifespan extension primarily.
So how about the obesity drugs? Are they longevity drugs?
Yeah, it depends how hard you want to squint. I would say that the drugs are probably a little overhyped. They don't seem to have good patient retention. 50% of patients go off of them for side effects. And when you do go off of these drugs, if you haven't changed your diet and lifestyle, you're likely to put the weight back on, but this time with about 30% of that weight loss was muscle loss. So if you put fat back on and you're escalating your glucose level without the muscle that you had before as a glucose sink, that's going to lead to diabetes risk, for example. So they may be not all they've cracked up to be, but it does sort of prove the principle, and it's unlocked a lot of capital to weight loss drugs that are maybe more effective or safer than the GLP-1s, like the AMP kinase drugs, or we've invested in Equator Therapeutics, which is a mitochondrial uncoupler that is unrelated to dinitrophenol, and it has its merits. So yeah, I think the field is a little overhyped. What I hope is that Lilly and Novo Nordisk and the rest will funnel this cash into muscle preservation agents, which they're already doing, new mechanism of action weight loss drugs, and then they'll realize, wow, targeting a really large indication space such as weight loss or aging is extremely profitable. I have a friend who was advising Novo Nordisk, and he said for years, he tried to convince them to test the GLP-1s, not just in diabetes, but in obesity. And they refused to do it. They said, oh, no, we don't want to go after lifestyle indications. We don't want to be seen as, doing that kind of thing. I think this changes that paradigm. So I'm optimistic overall.
Yeah, I hope that's the case too. I've heard that same story. And you were talking about the reduced efficiency in pharmaceutical companies and animal models, particularly disease models. I agree with you, by the way. I think the aging models are going to be better than the artificial disease models. But that's not really the only problem I think pharma's had. I think that the small biotech companies often use disease models too and animals and had, I think it was more risk aversion, don't you think? I mean, that they don't need to take the risk that the small companies do, and so they don't get the risk reward ratio right all the time.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there are many different ways in which big corporations are sclerotic and inefficient. It's not just pharma, right? If you think about, Microsoft or IBM or these big semi-monopolistic rent-seeking organizations, they at some point become so profitable that they don't actually need to innovate in order to meet their basic hurdle for investor returns. So if you think about it, if you're IBM, or let's use the example of Apple. Apple, people are going to buy their products regardless, it seems. So why not just roll out the same product every year, the same iPhone, and people will buy the same thing? You don't have to invest as much in R&D. You don't have to take any risk, and the investors are happy with that. The issue is disruption eventually, and there's a book about this called The Innovator's Dilemma. How is it possible that startups perennially outcompete these big organizations? These big corporations, they have all of the capital, low cost of capital, they have all of the talent, they have all of the credibility, they have everything that you could want, and they're constantly being disrupted by these scrappy startups that are constantly on the brink of bankruptcy, et cetera. And a lot of it is to do with the incentive structure, I think. So equity ownership is very important for everyone to have skin in the game, rowing in the same direction. Also, pharma used to incentivize the rank and file chemists, pharmacologists with royalties. They stopped doing this, and I think that was probably a mistake. Pharma has also tried to internally create these smaller, nimble biotech-like organizations, but there's still two fundamental problems. One is nobody wants to rock the boat, and they just want to, keep their careers and move up the hierarchy because it's based on seniority rather than productivity in a lot of these organizations. There's this paradigm shift. Everyone's drinking the same Kool-Aid. So basically, there are probably about 50 to 100 venture funds in the world that control, say, 90% of the biotech venture capital. And then there are 20 big pharmas that really matter, and only 10 that really truly matter, I'd say. And then you have the NIH, which controls maybe 80% of global biomedical research funding. And these people, they're all friends. They all read the same materials. There's groupthink. And that's like the case with the amyloid hypothesis, right? How could everybody be so wrong for so long? That's how science naturally works. It's described in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. It's where we get the term paradigm shift, as like with Galileo and all the rest. That's how science works. Or as Max Planck said, science progresses one funeral at a time. So anyway, I don't have a clear solution for that. But what I can say is these less contrived models and targeting the root causes of age-related diseases, which all kind of go back to all roads lead to the Rome of aging itself and the hallmarks, I think is worth betting on. And pharmas are not really doing that yet. I mean, Novartis has an aging group, Regeneron has an aging group. They're interested, but they're not really just kind of dipping their feet in the water. So we'll see what they do.
I mean, I've been talking to them on and off for 20 years now. So that shows you how persuasive I am. At the beginning, they actually said well, I won't tell the company. One company actually said, even if you imagine we had a drug that stopped aging for 10 years with no side effects, we couldn't get reimbursed, so there's no way we could make money off that. I'm like, really? It's like,
yeah, it's insane. They're very close-minded. And, if they don't have that pressure to innovate and compete, why would you? It's like the DMV, right?
I understand.
They don't need to provide a good quality of service because they're the only game in town. And similarly, there are really only 20 big pharmas that have the capital base to fund 100 million, 200 million phase 3 studies. And so they have this sort of toll-taking situation, this rent-seeking, where they're able to just sit back, wait for biotechs to innovate, and they buy them. The challenge is that it's this like self-referential loop where VCs are funding companies that they think pharmas are going to want, and pharmas are waiting for VCs and biotech companies to tell them what's going to work. So like there's a really good example of this. Metarex and what's his name? Jim, the CTLA-4, Jim Allison. There's a documentary about it that I saw on the plane. It brought a tear to my eye, literally. Because one, it was very inspiring how he persevered, but two, because it was so sad that it was so hard for him and all these scientists to get the attention of pharma, who should be constantly surveilling for innovation, and they're not really doing it. So the story is basically this documentary called Breakthrough, the Jim Allison Nobel Prize story, CTLA-4 checkpoint inhibitors. He spent, I don't know, a decade trying to get the attention of pharma for CTLA-4. Ultimately, it was a small biotech company that did it, showed that it worked in the clinic. That company was acquired for $10 billion. And, the checkpoint inhibitor story is history. And so, this shouldn't be the case. I mean, pharma should be actively scouting. I, was told a couple of years ago by a friend in Pfizer BD group that there are only 12, Pfizer only has 12 people surveilling all of North America for innovation. 12 people for all the universities, all the biotechs. It just doesn't make sense. So, but things are looking better. I mean, notwithstanding the last 2 years of the worst bear market in biotech history, biotech is growing as a sector. The just monotonically increased venture capital, more competent teams, better infrastructure across the board, new regions, Asia coming online for a lot of innovation. So on a long-term secular basis, I'm quite bullish.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Let's talk about immunoage for a minute. I mean, I don't want to diminish the brilliance of the concept because I think it is a really smart idea. But the idea of taking bone marrow out, doing the chemo, and putting bone marrow back in, it seems like somebody should have tried that. How much has there been research on this in the past? I'm not aware of it, but there may be.
Yeah, it kind of surprised me. I mean, one of the things that I've learned in biotech as an operator and investor is just because an idea seems obvious and obviously a good idea doesn't mean that it's being done. Like when I founded Samsara, there were very few groups, biotech groups, working on autophagy, maybe one or two small efforts. Now there are half a dozen. One of them was acquired by Merck. Pharma knows about autophagy now, right? So just because it seems obvious based on the literature doesn't mean it's actually being done. A lot of stars need to align for companies to be doing this in a serious way. I did speak to a bunch of hematologists about this, and they said, yeah, like we think this will work. There are some small studies that have established this, but nobody pays us to do it. So a doctor, a hematologist, doesn't get paid to bank your bone marrow by the government or by the insurers, so they don't bother to do it, because no one has run the clinical trials to show that it can be done, because you can't get IP on that simple procedure. It's just an in-clinic procedure. But if you had a way to improve the outcomes further, like with HSC expansion, rejuvenation, longer-term banking, then there's the capital to run those studies to definitively prove how well it works. But actually, there are people, anecdotally, very conscientious people, who get a diagnosis of cancer, or it runs in their family, or autoimmune runs in their family, and they bank their bone marrow, or they have umbilical cord bone marrow stored, and that saves their life later. And there are people who pre-chemo store their bone marrow for solid tumors, and then reinfuse it. And it's not, they're case studies, but it's not part of a larger clinical study. We do know quite clearly that receiving younger bone marrow in a bone marrow transplant setting is really good for you. It makes sense. Like, let's say you're 60 and you get a 20-year-old immune system, that's pretty good. The reverse is also true. If you get an older immune system or poorly matched system, that's really bad. So it's kind of interesting because in America, there's one organization, again, we come to this sort of monopoly, inefficient market problem. There's one organization that's responsible for most of the bone marrow work. It's the National Bone Marrow Program, called Be the Match. It's a pseudo-government agency. They generate about $500 million revenue a year, but they're actually not profitable. They're losing, on top of that, about $7 million a year. And it just leaves a lot to be desired. And part of the reason is because there's just one entity doing it all. This is true of many countries. It's just one government entity responsible. And so if we could open things up a little, let 1,000 flowers bloom, a little bit of free market in the bone marrow space, I think that would be hugely useful.
There's too much to talk about, Sebastian. I'm going to take a break, though, and bring in Weilan Wang, who's going to ask some questions from the audience and maybe a couple of her own.
Thank you,
Great.
Brian, and thank you, Sebastian, and thank you for this very inspiring talk. And we have plenty of questions from the audience, and let's go through that. So firstly, some of the audience are quite interested in your opinion on other potential longevity interventions, such as embryo selection and stem cell transplantation and lifestyle intervention and using digital devices such as the wearable device and then something pop up and reminds me to do exercise, things like that. How would you think about this kind of other interventions?
Sure. Yeah. So I see there are 232 people on the call. That's impressive that you stuck around this long. So dedicated audience. That's nice to see. And thanks for the questions, everybody. And no question is too silly or crazy. So go ahead. So to answer regarding wearables, I mean, I have a wearable. They're nice, but even with the perfect, most ascetic diet and lifestyle, and Brian Johnson type regimen. We probably only get 10%, maybe 20% lifespan extension, right? I mean, we see in the caloric restriction, the mice, maybe you get 20%, maybe 30% with hardcore caloric restriction, but the mice are not happy. So that seems to be the maximum that we can get thus far with diet and lifestyle type interventions, supplements and things, which I think are all great. And they improve your vitality in the near term, et cetera. I just don't think they're going to increase a healthy lifespan that much. That is why at Healthspan and the companies that I work with, we focus on advanced modalities primarily, things that we think will add decades to healthy lifespan. So we really like gene and cell therapy. Cell therapy, because we've seen the power of it in the animals. You can rejuvenate various tissues. Mesenchymal stem cells are very promising, various other more specialized cell types. Secretome from iPSCs, ES in the clinic and some of our portfolio companies. So we really like regenerative medicine. And we like gene therapy too. Challenge with gene therapy is the perennial delivery problem. We invest in a couple companies that have non-viral vector technology platforms that could basically enable us to use gene therapy for aging rather than just rare genetic Mendelian diseases. As far as embryo selection, this is kind of new for us. We did invest in an embryo selection company that can select for longevity, disease risk, and all kinds of other traits, cognitive, behavioral traits, physical traits. And so I think a world that does embryo selection, like let's say we just snapped our fingers and everybody had the available option to do embryo selection. It was cheap, maybe it was subsidized. IVF is increasingly subsidized. We could, in one generation, eliminate virtually all rare genetic diseases. 20% of the disease burden, 20% of the population has some rare disease. And for most of those, we know the genetic basis. So we can screen those out in one generation, kind of like we do for Tay-Sachs disease and a lot of other heritable diseases. That would be a huge boost to every healthcare system in the economy globally. We could also, let's say, we could increase intelligence or increase cooperation or all kinds of other traits that have a significant genetic basis. Intelligence is about 70% heritable, and we can already predict about 30% of the variance of intelligence. So we're very excited about that technology as well. That's very low-hanging fruit for improving health of the general population. It'll take a while to roll it out, but the fundamental technology, the algorithms, are quite accurate already, and they're just getting more accurate by the day with these larger and larger biobanks.
Yes, and thank you. And I think you may already guess what I'm going to ask next, and I believe you have been asked this for a few times. And how about the ethical consideration of some of these interventions, including the embryo selection, and also some potential risks for some of the interventions? For example, the well-being of the bone marrow donors. Like everyone wants the young bone marrow, but I want to receive this, but whether I want to donate it is another issue. So how do you think about this?
Sure. So ethical issues, there are certainly ethical issues with embryo selection, but I think it's wildly to the positive. Like it's such a no-brainer to do. If you want to know about some of the finer details, there's a book called Creating Future People by Jonathan Anomaly, which is quite an interesting read. But people have been talking about this for quite a long time, the designer babies phenomenon. I think nobody would be opposed to healthier, happier, smarter people. It's just a technical challenge as to how to get there. And I think it's probably important to keep the government from forcing people to make certain decisions. I think these kind of decisions should be, health decisions in general should be left to individuals and families rather than to the state. Things have gone wrong when the government got involved in these kind of things in the past. Ethical questions about bone marrow. Well, we do bone marrow transplants routinely today. I think in the future, we should be paying people to donate bone marrow because, like I said, 50% of the population in America who needs a bone marrow transplant is about 5,000 people a year. They die on the wait list. They can't find a genetically matched donor in time, and it's worse for certain ethnic groups. So part of the reason for this is because in America, it was believed to be, it's not actually, this legislation was overturned some years ago. Flynn versus Holder was the case that overturned it. It was believed to be illegal to pay somebody to donate bone marrow. And in some countries it is, but we believe that market mechanisms work pretty well to organize ourselves in a voluntary way. Imagine if we relied on the good-natured donations for food or for medical care or for a car or anything else that we need to buy, things wouldn't work so well. And so governments basically prohibiting the free market exchange, the voluntary exchange of bone marrow or other tissues, even kidneys that can save someone's life, is unwise. And I'm reminded of Soviet-era price controls, where every economist agrees that if you set prices in the economy, you fix a price, like the price of housing or the price of bread or whatever, you're going to get distortions in the market. If you fix the price too low, you'll get an undersupply of that, and that led to famines in the Soviet Union, for example. So we generally believe that we should allow people to transact freely and voluntarily in these tissues. That's not what we work on at ImmuneAge. We work just on rejuvenating the bone marrow, but eventually it should be possible to have a global brokerage or marketplace in all kinds of tissues that people might need. And one day in the future, we may be able to derive a lot of tissues from our own skin cells through iPS technology, but we're pretty far away from that. iPS technology results in p53 mutations quite often, and a lot of other tumorigenic mutations, which make the cost of manufacturing pretty significant. So yeah, those are some of the comments on that.
Thank you. And we're also looking forward that one day we can get this stem cell or bone marrow cells from our skin. That would be quite nice. Yeah. And this also comes to the next question, is about how we do research in this field and how we try to promote longevity. So many of the current studies are based on the lifespan expansion. However, for the agent, is more importantly, we can see that it comes with many other things like the functional decline, etc. This may be more important when we are still alive, and this is why we highlight health span so much. And how do you think about these aspects and how we can improve to moving more forwards to the health span?
Sure. So my view is, if you slow and or reverse the aging process, by definition, it will extend health span. We see this in certain long-lived species, as well as supercentenarians. So you can do comparative longevity studies. Our mutual friend, Vera Gorbanova, is one of the leaders in this space, Jan Vieg and others. We know a lot of the genetic basis of long life, and it comes with more health span. So it's not just like the Greek curse of Tithonus, where you get older and older, but you're in worse and worse health. These supercentenarians who are lucky, fortunate to have these protective variants, they have extra years of healthy life. So they're just aging at a slower pace. So we also see lines of evidence from animals, right? So if you plot body size and metabolic rate with lifespan, it's pretty much very strong correlation. But there are outliers, and one of the outliers are bats. Another are naked mole rats. These are animals that are small, fast metabolic pace, but they live a very long time, 30 years in some cases. Humans are kind of like that compared to other primates. Pretty much similar body size, but we live several times longer than them and age at a slower pace. So we kind of already know, just distinguishing the genomic differences between other primates and humans, what are some of these pathways that confer long life? Autophagy is one, immune function, DNA repair fidelity. By the way, if anyone's watching and you're wondering what kind of company to start, you should look into enhancing the fidelity of DNA repair, because almost nobody is working on this, even though it's so obviously at the core of aging. It's one of the primary hallmarks of aging. We have all of this evidence, and yet almost nobody's working on that for reasons that we can get into. So the basic conclusion is, if you're slowing the pace of aging or you're resetting the clock, by definition, that's going to increase health span.
So let me jump in there. You mentioned the term curating earlier. How do we do that?
Sorry?
How do we do that? What's your favorite strategy that's going to lead to like long-term changes in expectancy?
Sure. So, it's hard to pick favorites. One of my favorites, just in terms of the fact that it's underappreciated or underinvested, is enhancing DNA repair fidelity. But we've invested in 32 different companies. You can see them on our portfolio. Those are some that I like. My personal favorite is rejuvenating the bone marrow, and hence why I spent so much time on it. Because it's relatively safe. We can take the HSCs out, rejuvenate them, put them back, not too expensive, et cetera. And we know that it can be done. We know molecules that do rejuvenate the HSCs already. But aside from that, let's see. I've been working with some colleagues working in MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells. We discussed this in Switzerland recently. There are a lot of really promising sort of case studies, some clinical trials, company Cellco Labs running an interesting clinical trial as companies out of Karolinska. We met the CEO in Switzerland, and that I'm quite bullish on. I've heard anecdotally a lot of stories of people who had, serious problems, injuries, things of that nature, autoimmune conditions that have been ameliorated by even a single dose of mesenchymal stem cells. What I would advise is being careful who you work with, because a lot of the clinics out there are not very rigorous. So you have to be very careful. Cellco Labs apparently is the only GMP manufacturer. Brian Johnson worked with them recently, so maybe go to them if it's possible, or just vet those therapies. And later, I and my colleagues in LBF and the Vitalism movement, this sort of political movement to put longevity on the agenda, you can check it out, vitalism.io, and we're doing a series of conferences in Berkeley this spring. We like replacement a lot. So growing whole organs and tissues ex vivo or delivering in functional cells. We don't think that will be possible with the brain at any point, which is always going to be rate limiting. But with most other organ systems, we think that will be possible. And even kind of a sci-fi stuff like, if we had a human clone that was lacking a cortex, we could have a backup set of organs for everybody, and completely unconscious human, just a copy of yourself as a backup. These are some of the sci-fi ideas that we're thinking about a lot. So yeah, those are a couple that come to mind. And of course, platform technology. So I'm not really that bullish on AI. I think there's too much hype in AI, and I haven't seen any AI platforms that have a credible solution to the main problem in pharma, which is the contrived animal models problem. Once they have a solution for that, then I'll be very interested. But platform technologies we really like are gene therapy vector technologies. So we've invested in Ocean Bio, Matt Schultz, our mutual friend, a handful of other technologies like that, Remedium Bio recently. So we really like non-viral vector technologies, because if you think about it, if you can rewrite the code of life, the sky is the limit. The only thing that distinguishes us from a turtle that lives 200 years, or a ginkgo tree that lives 5,000 years, or an immortal hydra, is the genome. And actually, a lot of the genome is shared anyway. So we think that the true apotheosis, the final form of medicine, will have to be some sort of gene therapy.
I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot more known about genes controlling aging than there is about drugs. And so if you can really do gene therapy, there's a lot to tap into. Maybe I'll come back to Weilan though. One last question. Pick the best question out there right now.
Okay, so the best question I will pick for this is for you as yourself. And you have been working in this field for over a decade. And what is the thing that you wish you have been knowing before you start everything, and your advice to young people in the field?
Oh, advice to folks coming into the field? Is that the question?
And what didn't you know that you wish you knew, but when you started?
There's a lot. I mean, my views have changed, and I think your views should change if you're actually actively learning. Let's see. I used to, yeah, something that I really woke up to was when I got in the field, I used to look at pharmas and governments and all of these sophisticated groups with all their money and their titles and think, okay, these are the adults in the room, as we say. These are the folks that have it all under control. These are the folks that are, have a rational plan, et cetera. I have since learned in meeting many of the top people in the pharmaceutical industry, biotech, and venture, they really don't have a plan. And they're not coordinated, and it's not rational, and it's just, flitting from one thing to the next. Some VCs and investors and government folks are more sort of long-term oriented and philosophical than others, but really it's just kind of a chaotic mess. And we're sort of slowly, blindly moving forward. Advice I would give to people, it's really hard. I'll sort of defer to Peter Thiel's typical quip about it's hard to give advice broadly. It has to be very individualized. Maybe it's not so good for academics at NUS, but you don't necessarily need to go through the academic path in order to make a significant impact, have a cool career. So there are a lot of the founders that we invest in, a lot of the people we work with, they don't have traditional backgrounds. So you don't need to be biochemist by background to revolutionize the field. Indeed, if you look at the history of biotech and biology, a lot of these people revolutionizing it were physicists or mathematicians and people like that. So even if you come from a non-traditional background, you don't have to worry. You can work with a team that has the deep technical expertise to advance the field. And often that diversity of thought is very helpful. So yeah, hopefully that encourages some people.
Thanks, Weilan, and thanks, Sebastian. Enjoy the Thailand Alps, and I'll see you somewhere down the road soon, I'm sure. I want to remind people to use the chat function and the panelists and all attendees option to leave comments and feedback on the show. Next week, or I'm sorry, not next week, November 7th, our next show, we'll have Boris Djordjevic, who's the founder and CEO of 199 Biotechnologies and the 199 Clinic. And before we leave, I want to leave you with a video of 90-year-olds completing the Australian Marathon. Thanks for joining us. See you in November.
3, 2, 1, let's hear it! .195 kilometres in Australia. He is 90 and never too old.
I'm feeling like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down.